Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ed Albin, the Department Chair for Space Studies at the American Public University System. Welcome to our afternoon session, part 2 of Space, Human Factors, and Life Support Technology for Exploration. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our two speakers before we get underway. Arnold Nikossian is a professor at George Mason University, as well as an adjunct professor here at American Public University in our Space Studies program. He will be talking about the main theme of the discussion here today, space and human factors. And our next speaker is Francesca Schroeder, who is with Schroeder Law, PLLC. She is the manager there. And she will be addressing prospective space policies and legislation. Now, in between these two speakers, I will have a short presentation on an approach to space habitats design, really from an educational point of view. Here at American Public University in our department, Space Studies Department, we have developed an undergraduate course called Space Habitats Design. And we've also have our faculty and students involved in analog research missions here on planet Earth, one in North Dakota and the other one at the Mars Society's Desert Research Facility in Utah. So having said all of that, welcome aboard. Again, our session will run until 3:20 p.m. Please do put your questions in the chat or the question and answer section for the discussion, and we'll see if we can field those. So I'm going to hand it off to Arnold, who's going to tell us what he's going to share his PowerPoint presentation and tell us about space human factors and life support technology for exploration.
Thank you, Ed. Let me find my slides first.
Here we go.
Shall I keep you guys there? Okay, so let me go ahead and start the presentation. First of all, a warning. Some of those images are courtesy of NASA and our book from Springer. Like Ed said, current presentation will be part of the new APUS Space Study consultation. Thank you, Ed, for letting us do it, and Ed referred to it, and thank you for the nice introduction. All materials are extracted from published literature, and there is no conflict of interest to declare. Good. One of my really medical heroes, if you wish, is the founder. He was Canadian. I am from Ukraine, so we are both kind foreigners adopted by the United States. But he migrated to the United States and was the founder of Johns Hopkins Medical School. And people cite him because he has a lot of familiar quotes. And the best one that I like the most is the best preparation for tomorrow is to do the today's work superbly well. And I think that the speakers in the last session had discussed that so well that really I would say that they paved the way for whatever we are going to do here, whatever I'm going to talk about. I would like to make another statement, and that's anticipating that both JD and Vince and Kristen will be saying most of the things that I was planning to say, so I removed them. So my presentation will be short, but they facilitated my task. What are the learning objectives, what we are going to discuss today? We'll take a different look at the health risk in space environment, long duration missions, and what can be anticipated beyond the magnetic low Earth orbit, which is protected by the magnetic field. Identify requirements, knowledge gaps, select requirements, knowledge gap, because both Dr. Michaud and Dr. Polk did address many of those, and review select major spacecraft life support and habitability systems. So, spacecraft and habitat technology for sustaining space crews generically are radiation shields and advanced materials. They're passive and active. When I teach my students, I keep telling them that in the past we measured the radiation field around a Mir spacecraft, and we found that radiation usually is like the bow wave around the ship traveling in the ocean, probably at the where the engine, the tail end is of the spacecraft. That's where probably most of the concentration of radiation is. So if one designs an active shielding, one needs to be cognizant where the radiation is going to be accumulating as the spacecraft travel, and needs to be really cognizant that extravehicular activity for repair might be a problem given the concentration of radiation particles. Passive shielding is what we're using now. Food, water, and atmosphere, obviously, heat shield for launch and atmospheric reentry. We need to be cognizant meteorites, collision, and debris protective shields. And I am really excited to watch what the DART mission do, how we will be able to deflect in the future the meteorite and micrometeorite, which presents such a problem in the low orbit now. Life support and environmental control, protecting against contaminants, toxicology, and Dr. Michaud talked about carbon dioxide, fires, the decompression from penetrating micrometeorite debris, and sometimes what the Russian claim, sabotage on orbit of the Mir segment, and a loss of air that they were still tracking down but fixed. Noise is a major interference in the metal habitat for communication, and microbiology. Microbes are everywhere. Hygiene. Hygiene is a very important element for the crew health. It was known from antiquity. It includes body garment and spacesuits, and spacecraft maintenance and decontamination or habitat is the same thing. It's very important because in closed environment, it depends what you decontaminate. If you use alcohol, after a couple of months, you are going to be really high on without drinking. And crew system interfaces with different workstation. Okay, so let's go. And the previous speaker talked about mission control and sharing the experience. So future interplanetary travel requirements should consider that for crew member, a spacecraft is the only home and place. No place to go, interplanetary travel, you cannot escape very fast. So you should have some kind of rescue vehicle or a lifeboat. Evaluating human performing normal activity is a not so normal environment. We will talk a little bit about that. That's spacecraft design and layout. As mission go further from Earth, astronaut will depend less on ground and mission control for real-time information, and interaction between crew members and the equipment will be simplified to increase autonomy. And here is the evolution of the mission control for Apollo to STS, to Space Shuttle to International Space Station, and now the SpaceX crew display displays, which takes a lot of the things which are done on the ground into the spacecraft, but doesn't solve the complex habitat like the space station. And then interfacing also now with where most of the tasks will be performed by robotics, and that's one of the robots. So what's happening when people go to space? First is the removal of gravity, and there is an acute response. Some of it we'll see if it's adaptive or pathological. And there is an adaptive response, compensatory response, and there is a chronic response. And chronic response is not adaptive. It can be progressing to disease situation. So these are the symptoms and the risk which are discussed earlier by earlier speakers. But to remind you in a very simple cartoon is that what is in white is adaptive. Hearing and smell are adaptive. Taste changes and it's not adaptive. The neurosensory and neuromuscular motor system does adapt, but it becomes it's a compensatory basically to lack of microgravity and vibration, but it became a problem on the return and was discussed. Vision is important, especially for your orientation. In microgravity, in the absence of all the tactile and other clues, vision is the orientation. And we know of the anecdotal statements that some of the crew members on the outside of the space station, former space stations, have trouble to find the hatch after they were in extravehicular activity. So that has to be mitigated. Muscle mass strength is decreased, bone loss is decreased. Endocrine, pulmonary is adaptive, cardiovascular is not, as was described. Endocrine and immunology is compensatory for the space. Confinement adds to the whole thing. And radiation, which is not addressed in this presentation, but I would like to cover, saying that vaccine is unlikely. And I want you to remember that we do receive background radiation on Earth about 1.5 to 3 millisievert per year. And that comes from the outside and also endogenous potassium-40 that we carry from the Big Bang, if it was there. So vaccine is unlikely to help with the radiation capable killing the cells or damaging the DNA. Biomaterials, yes, can help, and shielding can help. Okay, that's a brief cartoon. So habitability and human design. So what are we talking about? In space missions, human basic needs are handled differently. An individual in space produces about 5 kilograms of waste. Some of it is returned to Earth, is sent in the Progress or other cargo ships and burned in the atmosphere. But some of it, like urine, is recycled, and the atmosphere humidity is added to that and becomes water. And it's only about 90, I don't remember, I think it's about 70 or 80%, which is recycled. So this is the requirement for humans, okay? A lot of per day. And that's very large if you add it over a significant amount of time, like 1 year. NASA recently has identified what it cost per commercial crew for a week to use oxygen, food, waste drinking water, oxygen, food, and water mass. And it comes probably, I think that Dr. Michaud or Dr. Paul can correct me. I think it comes to about $5 million a year per person, a month, a week, I'm sorry. So that's too much. That needs to, if you build hotels in space, we need to make sure that the cost come down. A $2,000 meal 3 times a day is not something that you want to pay for unless you are flying only millionaires and billionaires. CO2 is broken to carbon, to methane and oxygen. And in the future, probably the Russians are aware of that. Methane can be used as propulsion. Nitrogen on ISS is stored and also resupplied. But we need nitrogen in space for preventing lung alveoles to collapse, and if it's all oxygen atmosphere, and for the spacecraft, for habitats on the Moon or Mars, it can be obtained from the regolith with other gases. So environmental control and life support systems, as was described before, supply oxygen, remove carbon dioxide, maintain cabin pressure, temperature, humidity, circulate breathable atmosphere through the modules with fan, forced fan flow, and that's in microgravity, recycle water, and provide those things. Well, in Skylab, we had the early US space station. We had showers, but no clothing or washer. When we redesigned the space station, ISS, and we first prevented us for developing shower or washer, which were part of the requirement. So, the crew has to wear currently their clothing for several days and then return. Storage, ISS special water. Bigelow, who is a defunct company by now, acquired NASA expendable modules, inflatable modules, and it serves now attached on the ISS for several years as a storage space. But if you look at it, what is in the storage? Food and personal effect, water and air, and spacesuits. ISS volume is 91.5 meters square. 2/3 is for storage and equipment, 1/3 is living. That has changed. That has to change with the new technology. Example of spacesuit that we talked last time. So what are the spacesuits? This is the Mercury spacesuit, not too much UVA, extravehicular activity was considered. Then we got the Apollo suit with the booties and all those things. Then we have the space shuttle. And then we are going to have the International Space Station. NASA suit basically cost about, if I'm not mistaken, $155 million per unit. And it protects against some micrometeorites. It protects to some degree against the Apollo. And when Dr. Miller talked about doesn't protect radiation, we were lucky in Apollo. We had all the Apollo missions to the moon were flown between solar max. And now NASA gave to Axiom, which is a recent creation by NASA. It's a private company which is building the space station. Subcontracted Collins and ILC Dover, which will developing spacesuits from the beginning, and for Artemis, and we talk a little bit about that. So one of the major problems is that the research, we carry the legacy of early NASA spacecraft where the pressure was 5 psi, 1/3 atmosphere. So spacesuits were at 4 psi or 3.5 psi. we carry that legacy, and our spacesuits are not totally pressurized to 1 atmosphere. So you have to spend time in airlock, breathing oxygen to fly nitrogen, and to remove the risk of decompression sickness in the astronauts. So contributing factors are the awareness of symptoms, extended oxygen breathing period, reduced joint mobility. And I think that either J.D. Polk or Dr. Chris Miller talked about joint mobility on the surface. Moon and Mars surface with the regolith can affect the joints and can create havoc with the mobility. Elimination of hydrostatic pressure and gas washout creates cardiac arrhythmias, and launch and entry suits used by SpaceX are not spacesuit. They're just protect against depressurization of the transport. Food system. Currently in international space, food is an important part of the space. Psychosocially, they spend time in space together. It's a time to bond. It's a time of relaxation. And here is the mixed food between US and Russian food. I am not sure that there is alcohol is prohibited on the US side, however. Russian food is thermostabilized using cans and tubes. So sometimes we had discussions about that when we couldn't deliver US food and we had to rely on the Russian reserves. Energy rich, high in fiber, iron, and salt, and you need to be very, very concerned if you are going to have, if you are dehydrated, you're having too much salt, or if you are going to put too much calcium and you can create kidney stone without using what Peggy Whitson has tested and developed, a well-known ground-based countermeasure to kidney stone, which is potassium citrate, which prevents calcium oxalate stones. US food items, 200 items, 8-day cycle. The system is a carryover. It's a legacy from Space Shuttle. Needs to be updated. Variety supports long duration mission, but it has to be replenished, which should not be done cannot be done on interplanetary missions. Food storage, you can see dehydrated in pouches. They have to be reconditioned by putting a rehydrated, and pantry-style food storage. You recognize Yuri Gagarin, the iconic person out there, and that's how it's stored. So these are the goals for International Space Station. Space food. The chief health and medical officer at NASA develops nutritional standards. The goal is to maintain 45 days supply. Psychologically important, we discussed for the food. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. So there is a increased consumption of 90% of the food versus 70% for space shuttle by short duration missions, and reduction in nitrogen level by 43% has been established. Okay, can I go just a second? No, okay, let's go further down. What are the current economic drivers which will change future habitability and design? The economic drivers are these things, space tourism, basically. And Voyager Space Holdings and Hilton now, together with Axiom, we'll start to plan hotels. Projected cost for 86 hours. For 86 hours visit is $5 million. But why do we want to go for 86 hours and pay $5 million? So the price has to come down. And these companies will try to make money. They will try to reduce the cost. And Hilton, getting into the mix, will develop the capability for services and things like that. And the space station is made of modules and modular system built together to form a circular wheel and provide artificial gravity. So what are the key points to remember? Increasing distance from Earth is associated with new and increasing health risks. The International Space Station provides the best test bed for microgravity in mission of over 1 year. Remember that crews were able to get out during space shuttle with fluid drinking and whatever you conditioning, anti-gravity suits that they were wearing to keep them straight. They were able to, up to 3 months duration, especially during Skylab, crew were able to ingress, and after 1 hour or so, they were able to take care of themselves. 6 months is different. And if you look at the pictures of the astronauts being carried and cosmonauts inside in Kazakhstan steps on chairs even after 1 year, you find that 6 months is probably the limit when you can rely on their own effort to get out. So, after some time, people start to think that maybe travel with microgravity is not a good way to do it. Maybe artificial gravity is needed. And that's what the thinking is behind many new commercial entities. The new systems for crew support not ready for missions beyond the moon. Moon, we can come back in 4 days. We can resupply. Planetary dust and weather survivability are major issues. Human support cost has to be affordable to make space profitable. And novel technologies such as propulsion to go faster between Earth and Mars or Moon, artificial intelligence and robotics, 3D printing for food to save storage. For example, you can print medical tools and things like that, or tools for repair, biomaterials, which can monitor health and generate now electricity just for wearing them, and is being tested by Canada on International Space Station, US and Canada, are game changer for the future. And this is the launch pad, liquefied hydrogen, flammable gas. So when Colonel Mullane about the launch, that picture came to my mind. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Arnold, for that fascinating presentation. We've already had a request from one of our participants who's interested in acquiring your slide deck with all of this cool information. And I should mention, I wanted to mention that Arnold, and I didn't mention this in the introduction, but Arnold has been involved in space physiology and medicine for 50 years and is such a valuable resource to the community. He was involved in the final Apollo lunar mission as chief medical officer for NASA at Johnson Space Center. And the picture, I believe you see in the background that Arnold has on his screen, when you look behind Arnold, you can see a helicopter and I believe an aircraft carrier. And Arnold was aboard the aircraft carrier and to examine the crew of Apollo 17 as they returned from the moon 50 years ago. So it is really cool to have you here, Arnold, with us. And I have a question for you. And with your experience, how has the profession of space medicine and physiology changed, in your opinion? Sort of the, if you can give us the Reader's Digest version, how has it changed over the past 50 years?
Well, I can give you a quick one. The quick one is that it changed a lot. The creation of the office chief health and medical officer is responsible for really bringing the space medicine into the 21st century. And the interaction between that office and the engineering and safety groups has improved tremendously the transfer of requirements and guidance for research. And the office is done a fabulous job in creating requirements and standards and publishing those and making sure that safety is included in the whole technical authority that they call in developing those standards. So both J.D. Polk, his predecessor, Rich Williams, have done a tremendous job pulling it together and advancing the stature of the space medicine. Before it was all, all medical practice. Now it's more really toward a system design and making sure that human needs are met.
Very good. Thank you, Arnold. And for anybody that is interested, Arnold and his colleagues, especially J.D. Polk, who's the current chief medical officer for NASA, they have written the book on space physiology and medicine. That is the title of the book, which is available at your bookstore or on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. And this is the textbook, the Bible for space medicine from the guys who have the experience through NASA. Okay, well, we have about 20 minutes, and Francesca, I promise I will keep mine short. I want time. And I just have some slides that I wanted to go through and talk a bit about the approach to space habitat design, and really highlight a new course that we have developed here at APUS as part of in thinking in terms of CESA, the educational aspect of CESA. So let's see if I can advance my slide. There we go. All right, so here are a few things I'd like to discuss. The exciting return to deep space. Just touch on the Lunar Gateway as part of the Artemis mission to return humans to the moon. And briefly review lunar and Martian habitat concepts, some of the generalized concepts that are out there, and then show how we are incorporating those into our space habitats course, I believe Space Studies 426, which was recently developed by one of our full-time faculty members in the Space Studies department, who I believe is on the call, Caitlin Milliman. So I'll be showing off all of the wonderful work, Caitlin, that you've done in developing this course. And we are looking at also developing a complementary or follow-on graduate level course that would go into much more depth on habitats. And finally, I wanted to just say a few words about the American Public University Systems Analog Research Group, getting students and faculty involved in analog research studies. So this is really an exciting time that we are in. I can't recall being this excited since I was a kid watching the Apollo missions, which is really, I'm showing my age, that is what got me into space studies and the study of lunar and Martian geology, which is where my area of expertise is. NASA has contracted with SpaceX to build to utilize one of their starships as the lander for the Artemis mission. So hopefully we'll see astronauts put boot prints on the moon within the next 3 to 5 years. This is really exciting. And from the title of our CISA conference, 50 years from the moon, it has been a long time, 50 years since Gene Cernan was the last man on the moon back in December of 1972. Okay, so the efforts with Artemis and SpaceX are on a course to get back to the moon, and a space habitat design that is well underway is the Gateway configuration, what I like to call an international space station, not in orbit around the Earth, but in orbit around the moon. It only makes sense that we have a sort of a way station above the moon, a little extra effort for safety, and also as a sort of a port of call before the astronauts depart for and return from the surface of the moon back to the Earth. So this is really cool, and we'll see this developed by NASA, ESA as commercial space partners over the next few years. Okay, some concept designs that are out there for habitats, and Arnold mentioned this in his previous talk, is the inflatable habitat. And I think this is just incredibly ingenious. I think a lot of us recall von Braun's rotating wheel in space that was utilized in the famous movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And those may come in the future. Von Braun, as we know, is way ahead of his time, but it's pretty cool. You can send up one of these inflatable modules in a very, very small space, sort of like a balloon, and then blow it up, and you have your habitat. So we'll see these. As Arnold mentioned, there's a test module on board the International Space Station, and Bigelow has developed some really cool modules, and these are some of those shown connected together on the moon, a possibility for this technology. Now, one thing that we're going to have to do both on the moon, especially on the moon, but also on Mars to protect from cosmic radiation and solar activity, CME events, is to provide good insulation and shelter against cosmic and solar radiation. So I think with inflatable habitats or any other kind of habitat, these are ultimately going to have to be put. One solution is to put these habitats below the surface, to use the lunar or Martian regolith as a natural shielding source. And this was touched upon in Kristen Miller's talk in the first session of our this phase of the conference. Now, as a fan of 3D printing, I have off to my side a 3D printer and have printed all kinds of cool things. I am absolutely fascinated with the ability to 3D print. I cannot do it, but companies are here producing buildings within a day or two by 3D printing not plastic, but cement into structures like what you see here. This is a theoretical 3D printed Mars habitat, and the material used that's coming out of this giant printer, computerized printer, you just push the button. The engineers have designed whatever structure they want, push the button, and the 3D printer goes to work. So what we need to do is come up with a viable Martian and lunar equivalent of cement. And I think we're going to see this developed in the future. And if you look closely, you can see the individual layering, as you might see with, for example, my small 3D printer that I have here. Other technologies will utilize, and as a planetary scientist, planetary geologist, I've always been fascinated by lunar and Martian volcanism. And these two worlds have lava tubes. For example, on the moon, we see evidence of sinuous rills, and these are collapsed lava tubes, natural tunnels beneath the moon, and those occur on Mars as well. Basaltic lava has flown through there, and I've seen these quite huge caverns in Hawaii formed by lava coming off of Kilauea. And so we have a very inexpensive way of building a habitat based on these underground caverns, or not collapsed lava tubes, but actual lava tubes that have not collapsed. And I think we're going to see these developed. And what is interesting, high resolution orbiters have shown that occasionally we see a small collapse, and through those windows we could see down into the subsurface of the moon. And Francesca, I promise I'm going to cut this off momentarily. This is our space habitats course that Caitlin Milliman has developed that we will launch in the coming year. And let's see, I just want to very quickly go through this because we are tight on time. Here's a description of the course: introduce students to the fundamentals of space and planetary habitats, with focus on ultimately with lunar and Martian and perhaps even asteroidal habitats. We have a set of objectives, and feel free to contact me if you're interested in this. We've put a lot of thought into the course. The course is laid out to be launched in DL2 online. This will be an online course. And here's a brief outline of some of the topics: space, early space station, Salyut and Skylab, Mir, of course, the International Space Station, the Chinese Space Station. As I've mentioned, each week is devoted to what these particular technologies or habitats in space. With the grand finale in the last couple of weeks being Martian, lunar and Martian plans, and also discussion of our APUS analog research group, getting our students. We wish to have our students take this course before they get involved in our research group. It's an 8-week course with some cool discussions, and I'm going to leave it at this. There will be a talk following this one this afternoon, led by Kristen Miller, on our analog research group efforts here at the university, specifically the inflatable lunar and Martian analog habitat in North Dakota and the Mars Society's Desert Research Station. We're really excited that we have our first crew going to the research station early next year. So let me stop sharing, and I am going to hand off to Francesca, and I believe, Daniel, you're going to share Francesca's slide deck. And Francesca is Schroeder is joining us with the Schroeder Law. She's from Schroeder Law PLLC. She's the manager for that organization, and she's going to talk about prospective space policies and legislations addressing those things. So I will hand it off to Francesca, and I'll go through, in the meanwhile, I'll go through the chat and see if I can answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Arnold, for inviting me to participate, and thank you, Daniel, for hosting. Yes, my name is Francesca Schroeder. I am a managing member of my own law firm, Schroeder Law, in Washington, D.C. Working with me is an attorney by the name of Kelsey McBaron, and you can find us at our website, schroederlawdc.com. And I've had the great fortune of serving clients in the space and national security sector for 30 years, working with large aerospace and defense contractors and startup companies and nonprofit organization, financial institutions, risk management entities. It's a thrilling industry, as I'm sure you all know. Next slide, please, Daniel. So I want to give you an overview of the legal frameworks that are shaping, that are being shaped by and helping to shape how the legal structure around human spaceflight works and will work in the future. So obviously, as you all know, commercial human spaceflight has changed significantly over time. Now we have private citizens paying to visit the International Space Station. We've got suborbital space tourism. We have the Commercial Crew Program taking astronauts to the space station. And then we have an entirely, all civilian private mission going to the space station and low and low orbit destinations in addition to the space station. So very exciting time for human spaceflight. So obviously this has resulted in more humans traveling to space than ever before, and space transportation itself continuing to evolve from a government provided activity to a commercial one. This has also resulted in risks shifting more from government to private entities. And because the private sector has taken such a bold and exciting role in this field, now governments are looking at what their role should be going forward. Next slide, please. So there are international organizations as well as US domestic organizations that play significant roles in the development of laws and policies and regulations. So on the international side, of course, you've got the United Nations, and within the UN, you have the Office of Outer Space Affairs, UN-USA. And within USA, you've got the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. There's a scientific and technical subcommittee and also a legal subcommittee. And I've worked for many years as a private sector advisor to the US delegation to the legal subcommittee. Really incredible work that USA does to lay a framework for international agreements and states parties, governments to work together to determine how to flow laws and regulations and policies down to their citizens, their private actor citizens who are engaged in space activities. And then, of course, we also have the International Telecommunication Union based in Geneva. By the way, USA is based in Vienna. And the ITU is responsible for ensuring radio frequency coordination. So communications by satellite, but really all space related communications are facilitated through the international convention that governs the ITU. Next slide, please. So there are 5 principal space treaties, and in the interest of time, I'll go through this very quickly. There's the Outer Space Treaty, the Rescue Agreement, Liability Convention, and the Registration Convention. And then finally, the Moon Agreement, although I'll note that the other 4 treaties enjoy a wide range of signatories, whereas the Moon Agreement has very, very few signatories. And in fact, I'll mention the US happens to not be a signatory to the Moon Agreement. Next slide, please. So the Outer Space Treaty is, obviously a very important document, because it defines the basic parameters of how governments will work together on their space exploration and exploitation activities. So it's important to lay down the principles of this activity, and that's what the Outer Space Treaty does. It declares that outer space is not subject to national appropriation, that states parties shall regard astronauts as envoys of mankind in outer space and shall render to them all possible assistance in the event of an accident. States parties shall bear international responsibility for national activities in outer space, and they must authorize and supervise the activities of their non-governmental entities, their private actors. States parties that launch or procure a launch or from whose territory an object is launched are internationally liable for damage to another treaty party, and states parties shall retain jurisdiction and control over objects launched into space and over personnel thereof. And it's very important to keep in mind that the Outer Space Treaty, as do all the treaties, they bind the states parties, the countries, not the private actors. It is up to the states to authorize and supervise the activities of their private citizens, and that's accomplished through the passage and the implementation of domestic laws. Next slide, please. So interestingly, a really fascinating and exciting development is that NASA has become even more of a customer of commercial space services that you've all witnessed, whether you know it or not. So starting with the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, the Commercial Crew Program, which through the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule is taking astronauts to the ISS. NASA also is a commercial customer, if you will, of private space station activities, and will be in the future. NASA is going to be procuring as a customer launch services, spacesuits, space stations, lunar landers, all sorts of activities that in the past NASA might have developed from scratch itself. NASA is now acting more as a partner to the private sector, and in fact, even as a customer to the private sector. And this can be accomplished through a variety of agreements, but a certain form of agreement that's gotten a lot of attention in the last decade or so is something called the Space Act Agreement, which allows NASA greater flexibility to engage private sector partners. And this is going to enable, my personal opinion, this is going to, in a very exciting way, enable NASA to even focus more on highly challenging activities, like we've talked at length about lunar missions, with which they are working very closely with the private sector, Mars exploration, and of course, deep space exploration. So it's going to be fascinating to continue to watch how NASA and the private sector work together to achieve these extremely important and challenging goals. Next slide, please. So one thing that I often get questions about is what happens when we go to space, when humans go to space, when there are other activities in space, non-human activities. Do we need to worry about planetary protection? And yes, we do. In fact, the Outer Space Treaty says that states parties must avoid harmful contamination to outer space, as well as adverse impacts due to space exploration on Earth. And planetary protection is the practice of protecting the solar system bodies from contamination by Earth life, forward contamination, and protecting Earth from possible life forms that may be returned from other solar system bodies, which is referred to as backward contamination. And the Committee on Space Research, COSPAR, in fact, is implementing a planetary protection policy. Next slide, please. So the International Space Station, as you all know, is up and running and is home to astronauts and to visiting private citizens as well. Well, the activities on board the space station are governed by an intergovernmental agreement, which is among many governments, European Space Agency, Japan, Russian Federation, obviously the United States, and others. It was originally signed in 1988 and superseded by a new version, which included Russia in 1998, 10 years later. It's a cooperative framework among the partners for operation of the ISS. And it talks about ownership, management, design and development, crew, funding, liability, et cetera. And yeah, so on the last bullet here are all the partner countries, US, Russia, Japan, Canada, participating countries of ESA, including Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK. Next slide, please. So the next chapter is, of course, the Artemis program, where we will be returning humans to the moon. And to set forth protocols for this activity that are agreed on an international level, the Artemis Accords have been established. And the Artemis Accords establish the principles for cooperation and exploration of the moon. And NASA describes them as a shared vision to create a safe and transparent environment which facilitates exploration, science, and commercial activities for all of humanity to enjoy. Signatories include a broad range of countries: Australia, Bahrain, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, France, Israel, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Mexico, New Zealand, Poland, Republic of Korea, Romania, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Ukraine, the UAE, UK, and USA. And to advance the Artemis program, NASA, as I said on an earlier slide, is procuring commercial services for lunar landers, for spacesuits, for launch services, et cetera. Next slide, please. So we talked briefly about the international organizations that govern space activities, but in order for those principles to be transmitted in a binding and effective way, it's done through domestic law. And in the United States, there are various agencies that are tasked with implementing US law that governs the activities of private space actors. So we've got the FAA, which licenses launches, reentries, and spaceports. We have the FCC, which licenses Earth and space stations for satellite communications. It also serves as the notifying administration to the ITU, which is responsible for the efficient use of the radio frequency spectrum. We have the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is responsible for managing frequencies allocated for use by the US government. Next slide, please. We have NOAA, which is responsible for commercial remote sensing, and the Office of Space Commerce, which could in the future be the regulator of on-orbit activity, but that's still something that's being decided among the executive and legislative branches. So currently payloads that are being designed to, rendezvous and link up with other satellites. That's a very exciting new activity that is simply an example of the kind of on-orbit activity that the government, US government, is considering to what extent, how should be regulated. Next slide, please. And Daniel, I noticed that it's now 3:25. What do I do?
Yes, I do need to end this. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at like a 4-minute warning. Can you, Francesca, we have to share the room for the next presentation?
Yeah, we're past the hour actually.
Yeah.
So we need to close it.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, maybe some other, maybe you'll invite me back and I can do it again sometime, Daniel.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
everyone. The next session starts in about 4 minutes. That's at 3:30 in room 1. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.